I am so damn excited for this video. We went through and we grabbed as much data as we can, and I figured out who these wide receivers are turning into. Now that we have 2 seasons under the belt, we're able to go through and look at all of their comparables and handpick who we think they may be in year 3 and if we should be avoiding them or actually going out there and targeting them in 2023 fantasy drafts. Now let's go ahead and let's just outline what we did here. So y'all know back with our year 2 wide receiver expectations video, we essentially went to the RotoViz screener and we took the rookie season statistics from those year 2 guys. And we looked at a general range from about 10 to 20% of where those guys fall in. So for example, if we are looking at Ja'Marr Chase in his rookie season, he averaged 7.7 targets per game. He averaged 4.9 receptions per game, as well as 67 receiving yards per game. So for this video in particular, it's going to make a lot of sense as we go through this. We took the bottom 20th percent and the top 20% in the range of outcomes. So we are looking at all wide receivers that posted a rookie season that averaged 5.8 to 9.6 targets per game, 3.7 to 6.1 receptions per game, and 50 to 84 receiving yards per game. So we did that with year 1, and we also did that with year 2. So they had to have a very similar rookie season and second year season to Ja'Marr Chase. And this gives us a good little range of guys since the year 2000 that we could see Ja'Marr Chase's real ceiling turning out to be, or maybe his floor turning out to be. And yeah, if we're going to go through and look at this with Ja'Marr Chase in particular, the wide receivers that are going to come back from this RotoViz screener include Justin Jefferson, Juju Smith-Schuster, Michael Thomas, AJ Green, and Marquise Colston. So yeah, I mean, you have some guys that flame out later on in their NFL career, right? I mean, if Ja'Marr Chase turns out to be Juju Smith-Schuster, then yes, this is going to be a very bad season for him this next year, and you should probably be avoiding him in round 1 of fantasy drafts. But is that how we should use this data? No, it's not like Ja'Marr Chase has an equal shot to turn into Juju Smith-Schuster, AJ Green, or Justin Jefferson, right? I mean, in reality, you're looking at just one piece of the puzzle, and we have to dive in a little bit deeper with the other statistics and the other variables that we know with these guys as prospects that maybe lead to us a better conclusion overall. And if we're looking at this list of names, I would say that you actually probably have a strong case to be made for Ja'Marr Chase, his easy comp being Justin Jefferson. I mean, these were both guys, obviously, at LSU, teammates. So I know maybe it's just a little bit of a cop-out, right, for us to say that they are similar to each other. But I mean, if you look at what they had with both their rookie as well as their second seasons, they both dominate with volume. They're both hyper efficient. They both did so at an incredibly young age. So yeah, I would say Ja'Marr Chase is on the Justin Jefferson path. I mean, it's no surprise that these guys right now are consensus number 1 and number 2 in underdog drafts. Now, going over to Amon-Ra St. Brown, I know y'all are probably not going to like this initially, but hear me out on it. So Amon-Ra St. Brown, if we're looking at the comps that we are getting back, you have CeeDee Lamb, T. Higgins, Amari Cooper, Brandon Cooks, Jarvis Landry, Allen Robinson, Kendall Wright, as well as Dwayne Bowe. So yeah, with these wide receivers, the majority of them are crushers, right? Yeah, I mean, the majority of them, guys like CeeDee Lamb, you'd be happy if Amon-Ra St. Brown continues down that same path. And that's right now, if we go over to underdog drafts, he's being drafted as the wide receiver 10 because a lot of people are assuming that Amon-Ra St. Brown continues to dominate as a wide receiver 1 going forward. Now, my comp for Amon-Ra St. Brown out of these guys, which I know everybody's going to hate it, but please hear me out. And I think it's actually a positive. Very similar to Jarvis Landry in my mind, right? I mean, this is going to be a target hog. He operates extremely close to the line of scrimmage. He's not a deep threat, but he is going to be phenomenal from a fantasy football perspective. They were also very similar as prospects, right? Jarvis Landry went day 3 of the NFL draft. I mean, primarily because at LSU, Jarvis Landry actually had top level competition such as Odell Beckham Jr. on that same roster. Jarvis Landry also fell in the NFL draft given the fact that he profiled to be not a deep threat, someone operating close to the line of scrimmage that was going to dominate volume and be a little bit more valuable from a fantasy football perspective than a real life perspective. Amon-Ra St. Brown, very similar situation. Amon-Ra St. Brown had to play at USC with both Michael Pittman as well as Drake London in that top level of competition, plus his NFL Combine testing, had Amon-Ra St. Brown fall to the 4th round of the 2021 NFL Draft. Despite this, both these guys proved to be elite fantasy options. And yeah, I know you're probably not going to like it, but if we go back to Jarvis Landry led the NFL in receptions with 112 his 4th season. Jarvis Landry had over 1,100 receiving yards in year 3. I think that Jarvis Landry and Amon-Ra St. Brown kind of look similar, and that's not a bad thing for Amon-Ra St. Brown. Now, going over to our next guy, we're going to be very brief. Jalen Waddle looks like Brandon Cooks, right? I mean, if you're looking at Waddle, this is almost the exact opposite of what you have with Amon-Ra St. Brown, where St. Brown is actually probably the more valuable guy in fantasy football, right? Because Amon-Ra St. Brown's going to be the guy seeing the targets. Essentially, his value to his NFL team is strictly moving the chains and pushing the ball downfield. And that's why you're seeing Amon-Ra St. Brown in these underdog drafts going as the wide receiver 10, whereas Jalen Waddle has the athleticism. Jalen Waddle's going to be able to stretch NFL defenses, make sure that they keep 2 to 3 safeties back at all times. And that's very similar to what you have with Brandon Cooks, where maybe you can make a strong argument, and I would make the argument, to be honest, that Jalen Waddle is a much better NFL wide receiver than Amon-Ra St. Brown. That's why we see the Miami Dolphins go out there and pay 2 first-round picks to get him in that 2021 NFL draft. But he's not going to command the same level of volume that you see with Amon-Ra St. Brown. And that's why right now you're seeing Amon-Ra St. Brown go wide receiver 10 in underdog drafts, Jalen Waddle go wide receiver 11. And yeah, even if I think Waddle's maybe a better real life talent, I would agree. From a fantasy football perspective, we probably want to take Amon-Ra St. Brown there. Now, a wide receiver that has been skyrocketing up these underdog draft boards. I mean, it used to be really nice when we get him early round 3, late round 2. Now you have no shot. Devonta Smith has a ton of comps that we can pick from. Like, even with us narrowing the range a little bit, where all these other wide receivers, we looked at 20% worse, 20% better. Devonta Smith, it was closer to about 15%, 15%. Just because the sample size was so large, we had to narrow it down. And yeah, you have some beautiful comps here. I mean, you have guys that are Hall of Fame level talents. You have Calvin Johnson on this list. You have some other top guys like Andre Johnson. I mean, that was my first pick ever in fantasy football, Andre Johnson. I mean, I was a Houston Texans fan for 2 years back when I was little because we took Andre Johnson to Mad Shop. Percy Arvin, Jeremy Maclin, T.Y. Hilton, DeAndre Hopkins, another Hall of Famer, Cooper Kupp, DJ Moore, Calvin Ridley, DK Metcalf, Deebo Samuel, Terry McLaurin, T. Higgins, CeeDee Lamb. So almost regardless, if you're looking at these comps, we can say, yeah, if you're going to get Devonta Smith as that low-end wide receiver 1, a high-end wide receiver 2, with right now where he's going in underdog drafts, I understand a lot of people want to be avoiding him at this price tag. I think it's justified. I think this is about where he should be going in the late 2nd round. And of course, real quick, if you want to get into a fantasy football draft today, you know we're live streaming literally every single day Underdog Fantasy Football Drafts on the channel. Plus, you can check out all the player props on the screen on Underdog Fantasy. They're best ball, so no time commitment at all during the year. So I drafted 700 teams and won $150,000 on Underdog last season. Try it out for free. Sign up with promo code FLOCK. They're going to match your first deposit dollar for dollar up to $100. You get our 2023 fantasy football rankings as well as a free trial to flockfantasy.com with a link in the live chat as well, description and comment section. But looking at this list, I think maybe this is a little bit of my monkey brain in action. I don't necessarily know if it's the best comp to have. I kind of like looking at Calvin Ridley here. Now, I'm a little worried about this Calvin Ridley comp just because I think maybe we are just scouting the school at this point, right? Where obviously Ridley had Alabama, Devonta Smith at Alabama as well. But what I do like about this comp with Calvin Ridley are both of these wide receivers were hyper productive in college. Like Calvin Ridley dominated his final season at Alabama. Devonta Smith arguably put up the best collegiate wide receiver season of all time his final season at Alabama. Plus, both these guys are slim. I mean, you have Calvin Ridley, 189 pounds. You have Devonta Smith at, under 180. We don't even need to go there, but they're both slimmer options. They both dominated. They both stayed all 4 years in school. Well, Devonta Smith stayed 4 years. Calvin Ridley stayed some extra years in high school. We don't need to talk about that. But nonetheless, I actually think it's a relatively good comp. And if we're going to go over and look at what you actually had with Calvin Ridley in year 3, and one other reason I like this comp as well is the NFL situations are kind of similar, right? Where right now Devonta Smith has an alpha wide receiver 1 in the form of A.J. Brown on his roster, whereas Calvin Ridley obviously had Julio Jones on his. And yeah, you're looking at year 3 Calvin Ridley. That was 2020 when Calvin Ridley turned into a top 5 option, even with Julio Jones on that Atlanta Falcons roster. Not saying that that's going to happen with Devonta Smith, but it's in the range of outcomes. It's a possibility, which is why I'm fine drafting him here. Now, Kadarius Toney is a wide receiver that we've seen very few players look like. Kadarius Toney flashed talent his rookie season. I was very excited for a multitude of different reasons. This was a wide receiver you were getting at a discount going into year 2 based off his rookie season injuries. This was a wide receiver that, while healthy, had a blow-up week with 189 receiving yards, but most importantly, dominated from a yards per route run perspective. Toney was at the very top of the NFL with his yards per route run, which is extremely predictive of fantasy football success going forward. So I really like Toney going into year 2, but year 2, he crashed and burned, and now a lot of people are making the same mistake going into year 3, chasing his yards per route run, even though the volume has fallen off a cliff. At this point, I think we can say Toney's a little bit more of a gadget player. Now, his comps are Timothy Wright, freaking tight end, and Marlon Brown. So the primary reason that nobody comps to Kadarius Toney is very rarely do you have a wide receiver that shows talent year 1 and essentially does nothing year 2, is not able to get on the field. Our one guy we can look at is Marlon Brown, and Marlon Brown plays year 3 and then is out of the NFL in year 4. I'm going to stand by it. 6th round Kadarius Toney in underdog drafts, probably the worst pick you could ever make. Now, if we're going to look at ESPN ADP, it's a little bit different here. Kadarius Toney obviously is going to be more valuable when it comes to best ball, just given the fact that he's in the Kansas City Chiefs offense. You can expect some natural spike weeks, but still at the same time, the massive gap that you have between these drafting platforms on Kadarius Toney should kind of say, we probably have overstretched Toney's value, where Kadarius Toney has an ADP of 113. He's going behind Juju Smith-Schuster, going right in line with DJ Chark on ESPN, whereas he's round 6 on Underdog. Do not draft Kadarius Toney. Now, our next guy, Rashad Bateman, is also very difficult to look at with this model, right? Because with Rashad Bateman, you only have 6 games his second season. It's a limited sample. You had some big play potential. And if we're going to be looking at these comps, I don't love it from a playing style perspective. Obviously, Will Fuller was just exclusively a deep threat in Houston. Will Fuller was a wide receiver that, while healthy, was dominant in fantasy football. But if you really sit here and think about it, it's not the worst comp in the world if we're looking at Bateman versus Fuller. Because we can almost confidently say at this point that Rashad Bateman is not going to thrive off of volume. This is a team that just went out there and gave all the money to Odell Beckham Jr. They just drafted Zay Flowers in round 1. If Rashad Bateman finds success this next season, he's probably going to be operating with the target share at or a little bit below 20%. If he finds success, he is going to need to thrive off of efficiency, which is exactly what we had with Will Fuller. And what else did we have with Will Fuller? Will Fuller was a wide receiver that simply was not able to stay healthy. And that was really the downfall of his NFL career. I don't want to say that's going to be the same thing with Rashad Bateman here, but I think that there are some comps. Now, going over to our next guy, Elijah Moore has the Kadarius Toney syndrome, right? Elijah Moore, great rookie season, and Elijah Moore, year 2, doesn't do much. Now, if you're looking at his comps, you have Preston Williams, someone I actually thought was going to be decent in Miami back in the day. You had Kiki QT, someone that I held on probably too many dynasty rosters. You had Hunter Renfrow, Greg Little, Titus Young, and Donnie Avery. Now, if I had to pick someone out of this list, I'm probably going Hunter Renfrow. Obviously, we're hoping at this point that Elijah Moore has a career that turns out better than what Hunter Renfrow has been, right? But Renfrow, you've had multiple seasons where he's been usable as like a wide receiver 3 in fantasy. He's a slot wide receiver that can maybe give you a little bit more. I'd say Elijah Moore is probably like in more athletic Hunter Renfrow, right? And trust me, I'm an Elijah Moore truther. I loved Elijah Moore. We were pumping him as a must-draft wide receiver back in those underdog drafts. Whenever he was going, I believe, like round 9, right? Round 10. but he's been a massive riser over the past month, where now he's risen like 2-3 rounds, and it's much, much harder to draft Elijah Moore based off these range of outcomes. Now, our last guy here, I was expecting Rondale Moore to just show comps that literally turned into nothing in the NFL. I was expecting Rondale Moore to look like a just flat out bust that had no shot. But you have Michael Pittman here. Obviously, Pittman's not elite by any means, but Michael Pittman's definitely usable in fantasy. But Pittman's not the guy that we want to be looking at, right? I mean, Michael Pittman is an alpha wide receiver, big-bodied guy. I mean, stayed all 4 years in school, blah, blah, blah. It just really doesn't look like Rondale Moore in any stretch of the imagination. But you know who does look like Rondale Moore? Another undersized slot wide receiver in Jamison Crowder. With Jamison Crowder, not as small as Rondale Moore. Obviously, Rondale Moore is just a complete outlier with how tall he is. But Jamison Crowder, 5'8", 185 pounds, at times was useful as a slot wide receiver. I mean, you can go back to his 2019 season where he had 834 receiving yards. I think that's kind of what you're going to be looking at with Rondale Moore. I mean, if you're looking at where he's going in underdog drafts right now, I mean, this is a wide receiver that has an ADP of wide receiver 60. So if you think he can go out there and be a wide receiver 3, probably a pretty good pick. I mean, he's being drafted as that low-end wide receiver 5, high-end wide receiver 6. I think in the range of outcomes, he could turn into a wide receiver 3. But I think that's all I have for y'all. Please let me know if you enjoyed this video and you want to see this with running backs as well. I honestly love making it, so I'll probably make it with running backs regardless of what you tell me. And of course, if you enjoyed it, go down there, drop a like, subscribe to the channel if you play fantasy football. And if you want to check out any of those player props or you want to get in a fantasy football draft with us, we're doing them every single day on the live stream. We're doing them on Underdog Fantasy. Use promo code FLOCK when you sign up, so they'll match your first deposit dollar for dollar up to $100. You also get our 2023 fantasy football rankings, a free trial to flockfantasy.com. Since it's best ball, it's not going to replace your main fantasy football league. It's just some extra fun to have on the top since there's no time commitment at all during the year. And I'm unsure if you've heard by now, I won $150,000 there last season, but you can find that link in the comment section and the description. But thank you again, ladies and gentlemen. Really, really do appreciate you and really hope you have a great day.